Aberystwyth today. Just some really important news that I'm not sure whether you've caught over the last couple of days, but just in case you hadn't caught yesterday, the fact that our life at the moment has never been so good. I mean, can anyone believe what we heard yesterday? If you're a child in a school where the roof is leaking, if you are a child who's 17 waiting to go to university, who's being told that you're going to have fees of some £20,000 or more when you come out of university, if you are a lecturer who's worrying about the future of the research that they're doing, if you're a small business that's worried about the fact that their turnover has gone down dramatically, that they're having to put staff on short term, on the fact that salaries now, for many people, have had to be reduced, or there is a major threat of a reduction. They've been told that there's going to be 1 million people or more, I'd say that's an underestimate, who are going to be unemployed within a year or so. These are major things which, to be told by a Tory minister that things have never looked so good, is just ridiculous. What planet is this person on? We've been told as well that the Sustainable Development Commission is going to be closed down. This has been a key body which has been focused on holding the government to account on sustainability issues. Who is going to hold the government to account when it's so important that we now tackle these important issues, social issues, economic issues, and environmental issues? When I look back at how we've arrived at last Wednesday's Assembly's budget announcement of spending cuts, I have to pinch myself as a reminder that I'm not dreaming the whole thing up. 3 years ago, neither the Conservatives nor Lib Dem opposition were saying there was a need to reduce public spending, and they would match Labour's spending plans. The Tories had rebranded themselves as caring Conservatives. Public services would be safe under a future Conservative government. There would be no return to Thatcherism. And there was such a thing as society. Perhaps we should have known better when the spin was coming from a News of the World editor, former editor, who's now under investigation for phone tapping. Then we had the financial crisis caused by the excesses of the banking system, laissez-faire regulation, in particular selling mortgages to poor people who are never going to be able to pay them back. This crisis has had absolutely nothing to do with the public spending and services here in Wales and the UK. Suddenly, however, the public sector is being targeted by the Lib Dem coalition, and you have to ask why this is happening. And the thing that really jumps out when David Cameron has been asked on a number of occasions, are you going to increase public spending following this, when we're back on track financially? And over again, he has said no. And it is down to ideology. That is a prime motivation for the way they're taking things forward at the moment. The suggestion by the Westminster Coalition that cutting back the public sector and all the services provided will somehow liberate the private sector to occupy the space left is naive, dangerous and callous, showing a complete disregard for the less well-off in society. The UK is already recognised as one of the most unequal developed countries in the world, a situation which is only going to be made worse by public spending cuts. Even during the economic boom, despite the financial incentives and time spent attracting inward investors, there was only very limited success in developing the private sector in Wales' most deprived communities. Unemployment has remained stubbornly high, 25 to 30% in many valleys, towns and communities, with the public sector providing a lifeline of services and employment. Auctioning ourselves out to international corporations for jobs that don't last has failed and must be abandoned. We must be supporting small local companies far more than we are doing at the moment. Following Ian Duncan Smith's suggestion that the people of Merthyr Tydfil should get on a bus down to Cardiff, you have to ask whether the Condemn Coalition has any real understanding of the problems these communities face. The South Wales valleys have struggled since the 1930s, and it's pretty galling that ministers think that this Thatcherite on your bike, or this time as it's known, on the bus, approach is going to help at all. But hang on a minute. At the last general election, we the Greens said we didn't need to be making the cuts, and the finances could be balanced by a fairer tax system and investing in jobs and the Green New Deal to stimulate the economy. Even Labour and the Lib Dems backed away from the Conservative savage cuts, with talks of continuing the economic stimulus for a year. The Conservatives only received 36% of the vote and had no overall majority, so how do they now find themselves in government? Where has their mandate come from? Well, I don't really need to give you the answer, but here it is again. The first sniff of power and the Lib Dem leaders teamed up with the Conservatives and did a complete U-turn on just about every policy you can think of. Economic, defence, social issues, electoral reform, environment, energy. I mean, is there anyone to have left off that list? Giving the seal of approval to Tory cuts and the likelihood of a double-dip recession. Confidence in Parliament was already at a low ebb, following the MPs' expenses fiasco, and their millions were duped into voting Liberal Democrat under the misapprehension that they would be voting to keep the Tories out. What a deception. Libcom by name and a Libcom by nature. Have no doubt these cuts are going to be devastating for communities across Wales, hitting the poorest hardest. Whilst recognising the Assembly has had its hands tied and has tried to shield Welsh communities from some of the worst excesses of the Condemn cuts, the 9.9% reduction in expenditure will inevitably impact on frontline services. However, it is disappointing that the Welsh Assembly Government has decided to cut back funding to the Economic and Environment departments. This is a false economy and will harm our ability to develop the low-carbon economy of the future, so important as we were hearing earlier on this morning, for creating green jobs, tackling climate change and preparing for increases in energy and raw material costs. British Gas has already warned prices are going to go up 7% early next year, increasing fuel poverty. And I know from my own work providing environmental support to businesses across Wales that cardboard prices and paper prices have increased by more than 35% over the last year, and then they've already had to factor in similar prices for next year. Further price rises in raw materials are inevitable as demand increases from countries such as India and China. Just one little statistic: if everyone in China used paper at the same level that they use in the United States at the moment, every sheet of paper used around the world would need to be used in China. Now, that's not saying that there's anything with the aspiration that they have in China, in theory, for taking that forward. It's just showing that in reality, we just can't go on living and using resources in the same way, because we're going to have serious implications for our economy and our businesses. We should be investing in our housing stock, improving energy and resource efficiency in the wider economy, and developing renewable energy, helping to lift the poorest in society out of fuel poverty, creating jobs and reducing our carbon emissions. Fortunately, there are huge economic and social benefits to be had from developing the low-carbon economy, including, we estimate, creating 50,000 jobs across Wales in the green job sector. We will be paying less for energy and will be improving our security of energy supply. It's worth remembering, we heard earlier about the benefits of using renewable energy. Nowadays, we're not actually just talking about having our heads in the clouds. We are actually talking about things that other people are doing. We can look overseas, we can look to Denmark, Germany, Spain. Spain, 30% renewable energy, Germany, 20%, Denmark, 30%. We're not now in a position where people can say, these things aren't going to work. We know they work. We know they create hundreds of thousands of jobs. We know our houses are some of the most inefficient in Europe, and we have got a huge potential to put this situation right and create employment at the same time. It is important to remember that the causes of man-made climate change must be tackled whether we're in an economic recession or not. It's just not going to go away. Sadly, ministers in Wales have chosen to protect a large part of the road building budget while cutting support for rail investment, sustainable transport projects, social housing and higher education. Caroline Lucas's election as the UK's first Green MP this year was a huge achievement, especially considering the current electoral system. Greens are now elected in Westminster, the European Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, the Northern Ireland Assembly, the London Assembly and many councils in England. Here in Wales, if the Green Party is able to build upon the European election results achieved in 2009 in South and Mid Wales, we will see the first Greens in the Welsh Assembly in 2011. Work has continued throughout 2010 towards this goal. Greens are needed in the Assembly more than ever following the recent announcements of the condemn cuts and the failure to make real progress in tackling climate change. Under the proportional voting system, just 7% of the regional vote is needed to elect Green AMs. And during the European elections we had 6.4, so it's only a small increase that is actually needed. We expect many people to be disillusioned with Lib Dems to vote Green next May. In South Wales, across all the South Wales regions, we're also targeting over 100,000 Labour supporters whose vote is wasted on the regional list. There is no point in voting twice Labour in these parts of Wales. If just a small fraction of those votes switch to the Greens, we will elect our first Assembly members next May. I know we're all working tirelessly for this in May, so keep it up and let's get out there and not get those doors knocked. Tair mlynedd yn ôl, pan oedd y Ceidwadwyr a Democratrwydd Rhyfeddol yn wrth blaid I llafur, doedd dim sôn am yr angen I cytogi gwariant cyhoeddus ac feddwedon nhw a bydden nhw'n matsio cynlluniau gwariant llafur. Yna, aeth y banciau dros ben llestri heb reolaeth gofalus. Ro'n ni mewn dirwasgiad ac yn sydyn roedd y sector cyhoeddus yn cael ei targedu gan y crymblaid condem. Peidiwch meddwl am eiliad nad yw'r toriadau yma yn mynd I difrodi cymunedau ledled Cymru, a'r pobl clotaf fydd yn cael effeithiau fwyaf. Mae awgrym y glymblaid y byddai cytogi'r sector cyhoeddus a'r holl gwasanaethau maen nhw'n darparu rwysod yn galluogi'r sector private I camu mewn i'r bwlchau yn syniad naif, peryglus a creulon. Tra'n cydnabod bod dwylo'r cynulliad wedi ei clymu ac ei bod nhw wedi trio gwarchod cymunedau yng Nghymru rhag ei gweitha, mae toriadau i'r adrannau economaidd ac amgylcheddol yn gam yn rhy bell. Fydd yn newidio ein gallu I creu swyddau gwyrdd i'r dyfodol. Swyddau fyddai mor pwysig I herio newid yn y hinsawdd ac I paratoi ar gyfer cynnydd mewn prisiau ynni a defnyddiau craidd. Yn anffodus, mae gweinedigion wedi penderfynu diogelu rhan helaeth o'r cyllideb ar gyfer adeiladu ffyrdd, tra'n cytogi ar fuddsoddiant mewn reilffordd, prosiectau trafnidiaeth, cynaladwy, cartrefi cymdeithasol ac addysg pellach. Roedd etholiad Caroline Lucas eleni I fod yn aelod seneddol cyntaf I Blaid Werdd yn Gamp Anferth ac yn dangos beth all cael ei cyflawni. Yma yng Nghymru, os ydy y Blaid Werdd yn llwyddo I ennill ychydig o dir a cynliadau y de a chanolbarth Cymru yn yr etholiad Ewropeaidd 2009, fe fydden ni'n dist i'r aelodau gwyrdd cyntaf i'r cynulliad yn 2011. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.